Thank you for joining. Today we're making mushroom risotto. Most of you probably received the kit that looks like this. So let's go through that and see what we've got. We've got medium-sized onion, half a pound of mushrooms. Wow, that looks great. Got some butter, Parmesan cheese, cocoa powder, pea sprouts, fresh thyme, concentrated mushroom stock, and arborio rice. This whole process is going to take 20 to 30 minutes. I think the best thing to do is try and focus on getting the rice onto the stove as the first priority, and then we could work backward on some of the other items. To get things going, we're going to take a medium-sized onion. We're going to cook these onions until they're translucent, almost clear in color, and that's going to caramelize the sweetness. These onions go from being, pretty strong in flavor and in scent to a beautiful caramelized flavor that adds some sweetness to the risotto. It's a very vital part of what we're doing. Also, you have to exercise caution to not add too much color to the onions when we're cooking them. So we're going to slice these guys. And the dice that we're doing today is about a centimeter by a centimeter. If you've got some heavy stalk on the end, you can just remove that. Okay, the onion's done. The onions are going to go into a 4-liter pot with a nice high side. The idea behind the high sides on this one is because when you're stirring both the onions or the rice in the process of making the risotto, the high sides are nice so that you can give it a nice stir without it coming off the top of it. So we're going to add the onions, do it onto a medium-high heat. We're going to add at this point about 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil and medium to high heat. Once this is going, we can start on the next step so that we can get this rice in there as quickly as possible. We have a combination of shiitake mushrooms. For the shiitake mushrooms, we're just going to take off the stem. It's a little bit stalky. We're going to take that off. Oh, the onions are starting to sound like sauteing onions. Give them a quick stir. So with the shiitakes, we're going to sliver the shiitakes. Again, slivers about 1/4 inch thick. Just like that. If you prefer to cube them or whatever, that's fine too. Not a problem. These are the cremones. The cremones, we're going to slice them. Again, about 1/4 inch thick, maybe a little less. You don't want to make the mushrooms too small because they'll turn into mush as they cook. So you're going to leave them a little bit on the larger side. The oyster mushrooms, we're just going to cut them. We're going to pull them instead of cutting them. That's a good size right there. Just break them apart. The stem, the bigger ones, just pull them apart, just like this. Get all these ready. Okay. Give the mushrooms a stir. Now, with most sauteing that you do, the sound is really important. The sound and the visual. You see all the steam coming out of it. That's the water that's evaporating from the onion. The more water that evaporates from the onion, the more you concentrate the flavor. If you keep these onions moving, they don't stick to the bottom. And if they don't stick to the bottom, you can get them to a nice clear color without having any dark marks on them. And I'm going to turn this down to about a medium heat at this point. We're going to take a 12-inch stainless steel frying pan. For the mushrooms, we're going to add about 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. Put all the mushrooms, get all the mushrooms ready. Slide this guy over. We're going to heat up the olive oil on this one. Again, to about a medium-high heat. Give these onions a stir. A lot of people are afraid of making risotto because they think it's a really complicated or difficult dish. It's actually super, super, super simple. You just got to dive in and do it once. Once you've done it, you'll see just how easy it is, and then the rest of the time it's like riding a bike, I guess. It's just super simple. So the color of the onions, you're getting nice and clear in color at this point. Just cook them a little bit longer. The olive oil is starting to warm up. And take the mushrooms. Drop the mushrooms into the olive oil. I like to season the food as I go along, and there's a few reasons for it. Number one is that with the rice is going to triple in size as we're cooking it. So in order for it to triple in size, it's going to be absorbing whatever you're cooking it in. So it's going to have the mushroom stock, the salt, the pepper, wine, whatever you have is going to enter the rice, and that's how the rice becomes bigger. The nice part about doing it that way is that you're actually flavoring the dish all the way through, as opposed to cooking rice and then adding sautéed mushrooms, for example. So in this process, we want all the flavors to enter into the rice, and that way when you're taking each bite is a combination of all of the flavors of all of the ingredients that we've used so far. So the onions are just about clear at this point, and we're going to do a process called the toasting of the risotto. We're going to add the entire packet of the arborio rice, and we're going to give this a quick stir. And in the process of stirring it, what we're doing is we're softening the outside of the arborio rice. We're warming it up, and what this is going to do is this is going to allow it to absorb the liquid that we're cooking it in a lot quicker, and it also adds to the final texture, which is going to be like a creamy rice texture, but we're not adding any cream to the dish. It'll make its own natural cream just from the extraction of the starch from the outside of the rice. The mushrooms are searing nicely. So as these mushrooms are searing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the concentrated mushroom stock and I'm going to get that ready. So here we have half a liter of concentrated mushroom stock. This is made from basically boiling mushrooms, mushroom stems, porcini mushrooms, and it's been concentrated. That's half a liter, and I'm going to add another half a liter of water to it, and just a little bit more. There we are. And that's going to be what we use for cooking the rice down. The mushroom cooking process is super important. So right now what's happening is if you hear the mushrooms, you can hear them sizzling. The sizzling means that they're actually frying. The frying of the mushrooms adds a dark color on the outside of it, which is the caramelization. And you can see that right here. See the nice little brown parts that are here? We want that. We want that on these mushrooms. And what that does is it brings out all of the flavor, the sweetness of the mushroom, and it concentrates the flavor as well. So we're going to give that a quick toss, and then we're going to start building the flavors. The flavors today are going to be salt, pepper, and because mushrooms work super well with thyme, what I've done is I picked some thyme, I put it into this little container for you, and I don't want to burn or cook the thyme. What I want to do with the thyme is going to release the flavor in the way of an oil or an essence that's inside of the plant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it on when the mushrooms are warm. And what that's going to do is going to help extract the flavor, but I don't want to cook this. I just want to warm it up, and then the flavors are going to come out in the final process when we add it to the rice and we start making the risotto. So at this point we're going to take the mushrooms out, and we're going to set them aside for the time being. And then at 3/4 of the way of the rice being cooked, what we'll do is we'll reintroduce them to the rice. Okay, now that the mushrooms have come out, what we're going to do is we're going to take some of the stock mixture, we're going to add it to the frying pan, and then we're going to deglaze this frying pan just by adding some of the mushroom stock and scraping up all of the little bits of flavor that the mushrooms have produced, and that goes into the rice. If you add the stock hot, it speeds up the process because each time you add the stock, you don't have to actually bring the moisture from the water and mushroom stock. You don't have to bring that to a boil, so it absorbs a lot faster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this to about a medium heat so that it's always nice and warm, and we're going to continue stirring this. If you want to add red wine to your stock, which is not a bad idea for a mushroom stock because mushroom risotto pairs perfectly with red wine, I'm going to add about 2 ounces of it at this point. The idea behind adding it at the very, very beginning has to do with being able to evaporate all of the alcohol and still maintain the red wine flavor that's going to show up in the form of a light acidity in the dish. The red wine is going to help add balance to the dish. And we stir it. So the common myth about risotto is that you have to stir it continuously. Well, you don't have to stir it continuously, but you do have to stir it a lot. The idea behind making the risotto has to do with making sure that you stir it enough that the bottom doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan. If the rice sticks to the bottom of the pan and it burns there, it's going to add bitterness to the dish. So with a wooden spoon, you can give it a good scrape on the bottom if you feel that it's sticking, and you can constantly stir and get it going. And with the stock being hot, you can add about 25% of the stock to start off with. And there we go. Now, at this point, what's going to happen is that the rice is starting to expand, and it's expanding because it's drawing in all the flavor from what we've started cooking. So the flavors currently are salt, olive oil, the mushrooms. That's all in this dish. It's all being drawn in, and because I want to build flavors along the way, I'm going to add some salt at this point. I'm going to add some pepper at this point. And the final seasoning obviously will take place a little later on before we finish serving. And we stir. Risotto is predominantly found in northern Italy, especially in the area around Piedmont. Risottos in northern Italy you'll find are a little bit lighter, mushroom flavor, lots of seafood risotto. And if you go into the southernmost areas, it's less common. You'll see it less frequently on restaurant menus, but when you do find it there, you'll find that it sometimes has a tomato base, or it might have stronger components like sausage or rapini or other dishes. And the whole idea behind the risotto is you basically make it from whatever is in season. So it's kind of like a pasta in the sense that, if you've got mushrooms available, it's a mushroom risotto. If you've got rapini, it's rapini. And the Italians like to keep it simple when it comes to risotto. Don't overcomplicate it. So if you were making, for example, an asparagus risotto, you would take half the asparagus, which is the nice fresh green part, you'd set that aside, take all the thicker part, the stemmy part, the woody part, you'd boil that down, and then what you do, you run it through a food processor, strain it, and you'd extract all the flavors, and then you would build the risotto by just adding in the asparagus flavor. So that would be just asparagus and Parmesan. Today it's going to be just mushroom and Parmesan. So this is boiling down nicely. Again, we've got it down to about medium-high heat. The stock has come to a boil, so now when we add it in, it'll introduce into the rice a lot quicker. Now, if you add enough liquid to the risotto, you can actually step away and do whatever other prep you might have to work on. So if you're making a salad, having a cocktail or a glass of wine, this is a good time to do it. You can step away while it does its own thing. This freshly grated Parmesan cheese. The butter is going to be added on at the very last minute just to finish it. We've got an interesting ingredient here. This is cocoa powder. This is an unsweetened dark cocoa powder, and what we're going to do with this cocoa powder is we're going to add it to the risotto in just a short while from now. The cocoa powder has got a little bit of bitterness to it, and it's got a little bit of earthiness to it, and what it's going to do is it's going to almost enhance the flavors of the mushrooms in this dish. It also adds a nice mushroom color to it. So when we're adding this in, we're going to add in the entire little container, going to stir it in. And you'll notice that this concoction that we've got happening here, it's going to darken in color. Chef Andy Christoph and I were working one day when we were trying to figure out the best way to make the most concentrated flavor of risotto. And during that experimentation process, we added in the cocoa powder, and we found that it was the best expression. Bringing out all of the mushroom flavor was to add the cocoa powder. Wow, that smells like something. Give it a little stir. The moisture is evaporating rather quickly at this point. The liquid from the mushroom stock. I'll go check on the mushrooms. Wow, they smell amazing, just like the forest. We're going to add in almost all of the rest of the mushroom stock. Okay, this is cooking along nicely. So as we go along, this liquid that's in here, combined with the starch from the rice, is going to start to thicken, and that's what's actually going to make the creaminess or the cream that you're going to taste and see at the end as the starches from the rice combine with the mushroom stock, and that's actually adding the flavor. The rice is going to absorb the majority of that liquid, but some of it's going to stay on in the form of a sauce. The mushroom stock that we sent was already super concentrated, and we're going to pour the rest of it in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up some water to finish. You can use water, you can also use some vegetable stock if you like. If you're using vegetable stock, don't use any vegetable stock that contains red pepper, asparagus, or broccoli. They overpower this particular dish. I find that you have to be careful with the vegetable stock. If you're adding vegetable stock in, you want to have a vegetable stock that has very neutral flavors. A vegetable stock that perhaps has been made with carrot, celery, and onion with no other real ingredients, because they might have the ability to overpower the dish. I know that red pepper in vegetable stock tends to ferment. Broccoli, asparagus, and cauliflower sometimes add an odd flavor component to the vegetable stock as well. So this is coming along nicely. Yeah. I'm going to taste the stock at this point just to see how we're doing with the seasoning part of it. The rice for sure isn't ready, but has a beautiful flavor. And we stir. Right now, if there was anything that was stuck on the bottom of the pot, the wooden spoon is a really good idea, because you get to scrape it all off and reincorporate it back into the dish. I like to use either stainless steel or copper pots that have been lined with stainless steel. I prefer not to use aluminum. I find that aluminum adds a little gray color to the dish, but basically you can use whatever pots you have at home. Teflon is fine as well, or any kind that has a non-stick coating. They all work. We're going to serve it in an oversized risotto bowl. I've got these prepped already. The risotto bowl, you know, the shape of it is really important, because if you serve it in a risotto bowl, when you're eating it with a fork, you can kind of push the rice up alongside the plate to the side of the bowl, and then you can consume it that way. If you do it on a flat plate or something that doesn't have a high side, it becomes a little bit more difficult to eat. So that bowl is perfect for long pasta, also perfect for rice. Wow, it smells great. When making the risotto, it's important to note that the amount of liquid is an approximate amount, because a lot of the liquid evaporates. When you're making rice, for example, you can say, hey, take 1 part of rice, 2 parts water, bring it to a boil, put a lid on it and simmer it. When all the rice is gone, the risotto or the rice is ready, which is great. The only problem is that when you're making risotto, a lot of the liquid evaporates into the air during the cooking process. So if you're cooking it at a high temperature or a low temperature, the amount of liquid in the dish will actually vary. To be safe, I would say that you need 4 times as much liquid as you need rice for making risotto, which is double what you'd use for a traditional white rice. So right now most of the liquid is gone, and this is the natural starch that's starting to thicken and flavor the risotto along with the cocoa color. I'm going to give it a little taste at this point and see how we're coming along. That tastes great. Now, for sure, it needs more salt, it needs more pepper, it needs to cook longer. I'm not going to add salt and pepper at this point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wait until the very last minute, because I'm going to be adding the Parmesan cheese to this dish and also be adding the butter to this dish. After I add the Parmesan and the butter and the mushrooms, and immediately prior to serving it, I'm going to taste it again, and I'm going to adjust my flavors at that point. If you're finding that your risotto is sticking to the bottom of the pan, real easy thing to do is just turn down the heat a little bit, add a little bit more liquid, use the wooden spoon, scrape up any of the crispy bits along the bottom. The largest group of people that I ever made mushroom risotto was for 350 people, 400 people at the Royal Ontario Museum. And my client had had the mushroom risotto they'd served at their home before, and they wanted to serve that at their daughter's wedding. Well, The Royal Ontario Museum is difficult to cook at the best of times. Their kitchen is it's not the best kitchen for the number of people that we can serve at that venue. And in order to do the risotto properly, because of how long it takes to make the dishes and plate the dishes, the only real way to make it properly was we had to make it in 8 different batches. So the way that we made it in 8 different batches is we took the 400 portions and we divided it into 8 50-portion containers. And then we had 8 rondeaus that were stainless steel, and we had 8 cooktops. And what we did is we timed it. We figured that it was going to take about 3 minutes to serve 50 portions of risotto from a rondeau. So when we started the process, what we did is we started one immediately, then one 3 minutes after, then one 3 minutes after, or could have been 2 minutes after. And the idea behind that is that because the risotto has a very finite window for it being ready, is that we wanted the next batch to come off the stove and be of completely the correct consistency. And the correct consistency, in my opinion, is that the risotto should be a little bit watery coming out, a little bit saucy, and you put it into the plate at that point, and by the time the plate goes from the kitchen to the dining room, the rice is still absorbing some of the liquid. And also, as the risotto starts to cool down, it starts to thicken a little bit and congeal. And that's a combination of the heat from the risotto, the rice sucking in some of the moisture, and also the Parmesan cheese that's been added at the end. The important part for me about the risotto is to serve it a little bit wet. And in my opinion, what that means is that when it's coming out of the pot, you want it to look a little bit more wet or soupy than you would, given the fact that by the time it travels from the kitchen to the table and it might sit for a moment, the rice will continue to absorb the moisture. And also, as it starts to cool down, it'll start to thicken all on its own. The combination of the rice absorbing and also the cheese thickens it a bit, and you don't want it to be too pasty. So if you start off with the risotto that's just maybe 5% or 10% more liquidy than you'd like to think it should be, by the time it's time to consume it and your guests are seated and they're starting to eat, it's going to be the right texture. So we're pretty close to that right texture right now. We're going to give it another quick stir. Okay, so we're going to add a final little bit of liquid. Okay, at this point, we're going to take the mushrooms that we set aside and we're going to put them all in there. Get all the mushrooms in. Stir them in. So the mushrooms were predominantly cooked in the frying pan. And now what's going to happen is the mushrooms are being reintroduced to, boiling water. And because mushrooms are mainly water, what's going to happen here is that the mushrooms are going to start to cook a little bit more, and they're going to release some of that water into the rice, adding even more mushroom flavor. So the mushroom flavor came from the mushroom stock and from the mushrooms that are reducing and cooking in this dish right now. We're going to add a little bit more water for the consistency. And here, I'll let you check the consistency out over here. See how nice and loose it is? It's kind of almost like thick soup, or this is 90% complete. This is getting really, 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 really close to the end. So at this point here, what we're going to do is we're going to add, let's say, half of the Parmesan cheese. We're going to add in 3 of the butter balls, and we're going to stir all of this in. Now, I don't want to cook the butter once it's been in here. What I want to do with the butter is I want to stir it in just until it melts. In the process of this butter melting, the less I cook this butter, the more sweetness it's going to have. It's going to have its own natural sweetness. So I want to let the butter melt into it, and what it's going to do is it's going to add a lot of natural shine to the dish and a nice creamy buttery flavor that's going to stand out in the dish, and it's going to taste fresh. And at this point, wow, I could really smell that thyme. And we'll check the seasoning one more time. Wow, that's good. Okay. And at this point, we'll do the final seasoning. Need some salt, a little more pepper. In my opinion, it needs a little bit more parm. And at this point, we're going to give it a real kind of rapid stir. And the rapid stir at the final product is almost like incorporating air. What we're going to do is just going to stir that, just a real nice stir, get all the parm melting in there, get a little bit of air in there, so it's not going to be as dense or thick. Oh yeah, this is going to be great. And we can get everything else ready. We've got some pea sprouts that are going to garnish right here. We have a couple of risotto bowls. One more final test. Perfect. It's time to spoon it out. I like to pile it as high as I can in the middle of the plate and then fish through and get all the extra little mushrooms just for the top of the dish. You can see the thyme is still bright and green. I can smell it, which is great, and the thyme hasn't been cooked out. It hasn't been burnt or wasn't added in at a different time. It was added in just at a period where the oil from the thyme can flavor it and you can smell it, but it's all the little bits are still visible, and I think that helps this dish. I'm going to sprinkle it with a little extra Parmesan cheese that we reserved at the end. And obviously, if you want to serve a little bit more, you can. And for a little garnish, we're using some pea sprouts today. That's the dish. It smells amazing. I'm happy with that.